depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Raising Excellence, the most important 90 minutes of your day. Hello, I'm Mike, and the Opportunity Ambassador and MC for today's show. And today is another one of the episodes in the Artistry of Loving Relationships. Today's show is entitled, What is the Indigenous Way? And we've got a special guest. But before we get to all that, let me introduce my fellow co-host, and I will start with Agnieszka, our psychosomatic illuminator.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. I'm glad to see you here, Paul, too. Oh, I jumped the gun.
And Willow, our trauma consultant.
Hi, everyone.
And Dennis, our freedom facilitator.
Greetings and blessed love, everybody.
And finally, our special guest, Paul Chermak.
Hello, pleasure to be here. I'm so happy there's a trauma consultant in case an emergency comes up.
Oh man, we're all traumatized in our own very special ways.
So true.
We all know that. But well, Paul, let's just let me just kind of get a general idea of who you are and where you've come from. It sounds kind of like you're Australian, but I understand you're in Mexico. So maybe you should give us a little background.
Yeah, you could say I'm a refugee from Australia who has found a safe sanctuary here in Mexico. Definitely, very glad to be here throughout the whole COVID situation as well. It's a nice place to kind of watch all of this unfolding on a global scale, because Australia is in a very unusual situation right now with incredible draconian laws being put in place. So it's kind of nice to watch it from afar, as frustrating as it is to watch what's unfolding there. But yeah, not too many surprises. I mean, I was born in Australia, and my parents are Czechoslovakian. I can really say I'm a Czechoslovakian because now they've split, but my father's Czech, my mother is Slovak. So I'm still Czechoslovakian, even though the political country is no longer in existence. And I had a strong cultural connection to the homeland, because my parents, particularly my mother and my grandmother, who lived with us since I was 1 year old, and she passed over when I was 18. But she was from a very small village in the mountains of Slovakia. And she basically raised me and was there for my whole period of my growth from a child. So she had a huge influence on me, and she was a very gentle, kind, generous, giving soul who always loved to give, and her cup was always full. Like, she was this eternal wellspring of giving. She just enjoyed giving. Giving wasn't something that depleted her. Giving was something that fueled her and filled her cup. So I guess that's what I experienced the most. My mother didn't have that as much. She was more modernized and had gone to university in the capital city. But of course, she still had some influence from her mother. But, I mentioned that because many years later, I'm an activist in Australia, building community projects and trying to bring community together, as I realized that the governments have very little interest in our well-being. And I realized, well, if it is to be, it's up to me. If it is to be, it's up to us. So we better start getting together and working on how we're going to look after each other, because these politicians aren't going to be doing that. So, and then after many years of being so passionate about that, and realizing that very few people had the passion I had for uniting and bringing the tribes together and connecting to that ancient indigenous tribal way that is within all of us, because we're all indigenous to somewhere. We all have some indigenous roots, and for hundreds of thousands of years, humans existed in tribes, in groups, and if you were ostracized from the tribe, it almost spelled certain death. You'd be taken as a slave, maybe, or you'd be eaten by a wild animal, or you just didn't have that economy of scale, one could say, that ancient economy of scale, and of that protection and that synergistic collective that helped people to thrive in those ancient times. So we've got that naturally in our blood, but the modern age, I would believe, most specifically since the Industrial Revolution, we've been pulled apart and we're living very separate lives. So, when I asked that question about why is it that I've got this deep passion for us to come together and look at our tribal roots and try and return to some modern version of that, bringing the best of modern technology with the best of ancient wisdom and fusing it together into something cohesive that can benefit all of us. And I was looking at, why am I so passionate about this and why can't I get it out of my head? And I thought back, you know what, it's probably my grandmother, because she had this small village mentality in her psyche of this way of being that I really resonated with, and I never saw it really in my community in Australia. And that brings me to Latin America and Mexico, because as soon as I came here my first time when I was 18, I immediately, within days or weeks, I felt, hey, hang on, this place is feels like everyone's a bit like my grandmother here. So that was like a reawakening. I'm like, wow, I've gone from a country where there's a much more cold and disconnected culture to Mexico, where people are very warm and curious, and they're giving, and they get joy out of sharing a laugh, sharing a smile, sharing a meal. And I resonated with that. So that's kind of a little background, and that's why it was my journey to finally come back to Mexico. I always wanted to come back to Latin America after coming here for the first time, around 25 years ago. It's been a while ago now. And now I'm just being very happy here for the last 2 years in Mexico.
So you came to Mexico when you were 18?
My first trip was 1 year. I spent 1 year here with two friends bumming around, surfing from Mexico. We took a bus almost all the way by bus, basically from Mexico down to Peru and Bolivia.
That's
so
cool.
It was a 1 year journey, and it was like a really amazing education, really. And I learned Spanish throughout that year, obviously. Yeah.
That's cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so
That
that's
sounds like
kind of,
fun.
So I got to experience a lot of different cultures along the way. We did take a flight from Honduras to Colombia, and so I have missed Nicaragua. I've spent a little bit of time in Belize and Panama and Costa Rica in other trips more so. But because I've gone back and forth. All up, I've spent about 4 years in Latin America, which is really where I feel the most connection. I've traveled through 32 countries in the world, but and connected to some indigenous communities in each of those countries. And also Australia is such a melting pot, so you get a little bit of different cultures, very similar to many big cities in the USA. You'll get a taste of different cultures. So I've tasted the flavor of different cultures, and I've always resonated with the warmth of the hearts of Latin American people. So that's kind of, yeah.
So Paul, in particular, some of the things you've been doing in the past few years, the idea is to really kind of highlight some of the indigenous kind of factors when it comes to relationships and how they go about their artistry of loving relationships, and how it might be different from what most people in modern society experience. But you've had quite a few different experiences, certainly in Mexico and maybe Guatemala, right?
Oh, yes.
With some of the indigenous folks, and what, as far as how they handle their relationships, what can you say in general?
Yeah, all right, it's an interesting topic, this one, and it's a really good question. I've seen, I've had the influence as well from. It's interesting living in Australia. We don't learn about this at school, but they massacred most of the indigenous population. I'm sure it's similar to the USA, where a lot of them probably died from diseases as well, introduced diseases. But I've heard a lot more about the massacres and the places where massacres happen from the native indigenous people that I never heard about in school, and because of the connection and the emotion with which they shared these experiences that were passed down through their communities, I really believe that they were legit about that. But I've had very little connection to Australian Indigenous people, except seeing the negative results of this they call the stolen generation, where children were separated from their parents. Very similar to the USA, very similar to Canada, trying to take them out of their culture, teach them that their old ways are the wrong ways, and they need to modernize and come to a more godly way of living.
Did you happen to see that episode we did a couple of weeks ago with Miss Shirley?
No.
So
Miss
she
Shirley
talked about a lot of that kind of similar stuff with the Canadian, like residential schools in Canada, and her grandmother's experience and her mother's experience. It's very interesting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, there's some really amazing, I guess you could call them activists and researchers who are raising awareness about that. In Canada, I know there's It's quite amazing the stories that have been coming out over the last decade or so that were hidden for so long. Yeah, and so similarly, I was like, wow, I never realized there were so many massacres that had happened. But it made sense because there were bounties on Indigenous people, and they considered them just as a pest. And they'd moved the white pioneers came and moved into Indigenous people's lands, and the Indigenous people would take their sheep as a more easy way to get food, and then they considered them a pest that needed to be exterminated. And I think there were also like bounties where you could get money for bringing in an Indigenous, killing an Indigenous person in some regions. So I believe that happened in Australia as well. So getting back to, so most of my experience has been in definitely Mexico and Guatemala with the indigenous people here, and to a lesser extent in Peru, especially in the Andes and the highlands of Peru, and overall, it's just going back to those basics that we all hear about, but we're so distant from those basics of looking after family, of being close to each other. Often they live in very close, confined spaces, so they may even share a room to some degree. Like which I would like to have my privacy. But Indigenous communities learn to live without privacy as such, and that was. And they also were very much about holding and touching babies. They didn't have a crib that they put the baby in. Someone was almost always holding their young children. And that deep connection, where in Australian, coming from the Victorian British English culture, they said, if you spoil the child, if you give them too much intimacy, they'll become clingy and they'll grow up into maladjusted adults, where the exact opposite is true. When you don't give a child a lot of touch and contact and eye to eye contact as well, and that connection, then those babies can be scarred for life. Especially if that's ongoing on a regular basis. And these days, families are so busy and rushing around, and even from birth, even now with COVID. Some mothers are not allowed to see their own babies. They isolate them somewhere away from the mother, and they're not allowed to bond with their mother. I've heard some examples of that. I mean, this is, and for young children as well, similarly, not being able to see someone's face. It's so traumatizing for children, what we're seeing today. So Indigenous people were very much more touching their children, and it was so normal. And then children would follow what their parents did, and they would touch each other a lot more, and touch and visually looking eye to eye contact gave children that reassurance and confidence, and that's why I believe that the suicide rates, although there's a lot of problems in Mexico and probably I'd say even a lot more in Guatemala, just across the political spectrum, as well as Indigenous issues with how they have been taken out of their traditional ways of living, and they're lost and displaced at the moment, culturally displaced. Even through all of that, you can still see the roots still there, strong, and that's what I want to tap into and learn from, and that's why my work is connecting with Indigenous cultures as a part of my passion and my work, and to collaborate with them across Mexico initially, and to a lesser extent Guatemala, because I'm living in Mexico now, partly because Guatemala was just a little bit too politically dangerous, and because there's just too much corruption and danger with the cartels and gangs in Guatemala. Believe it or not, I feel like there's more security here in Mexico than Guatemala, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think the Guatemalan government is certainly one of the most dangerous cartels in Central America.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's been borne out now by how they've handled the COVID situation.
Yeah,
really.
They're pretty tyrant, like
tyrannical. There you go.
Yeah. Very radical. It's funny because I arrived in Guatemala, and like within a week after I arrived, when I flew in from Australia, and that's now going back like 2.5 years, because I spent like 6 months with a few trips to other countries, but I spent most of 6 months in. Let's say 4 months in Guatemala before I decided to move to Mexico, and which was when I came up in Acapulco. So and met you, Mike, obviously, and connected with your amazing community. And then it was coming up to the 15th of September. And I heard that there's protests downtown. Like, well, I'm an activist. I like to say I'm a proactivist because I like to do proactive activities that are beneficial. Activist sounds like you're protesting and screaming and just jumping up and down and you've got no real solutions. But I was like, wow, how interesting! I'm here for these protests. And I went to the Central Plaza in Guatemala City, and I really was amazed how much passion there was. And I even connected with a Franciscan monk who spoke on the stage, and I said, wow, that was amazing. I went to him afterwards, so we connected and talked a bit more. And the students were protesting. Everyone was out protesting, big sign. And I thought this was the start of a mass revolution. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe I arrived to Guatemala in the middle of this revolution. It's all happening and unfolding. And I've never seen a protest quite so passionate and semi-organized. They even had politicians literally running down the street, running away from protesters. And I followed this group of people, and I'm filming and everything. And then this politician ran into a shoe shop, and the people were out, and he had like 2 bodyguards, but he had like 100 people crowded around this shoe shop, and he was trapped in there for like an hour and a half, couldn't come out because he was too scared of the protesters. And they're all just shouting, "You're a rat, you're a criminal, you're an assassin, you're a thief." And it was really hardcore, like literally like quite abusive to this politician, and so much passion in their voice. Anyway, I thought this was the start of something massive. And then like I watched the next days unfold, and then I watched it kind of all slowing down after a few more. And that's asking me, what happened to that revolution that was starting? And they go, oh no, that's just the 15th of September. That happens every year. And then everyone forgets about it, and they scream and jump around for another week. And I'm like, no way. That's just so frustrating and pointless. So yeah, I agree with you. Guatemala is really a mess. So they let everyone protest and scream and chase politicians down the street for 1 week, and then it's all over. It's back to tyranny.
So what is the Indigenous Way, Paul?
To me, it is the Indigenous tribes. Most of the ones that I've met and connected with, they are trying to figure that out for themselves. They are, and I see us having a role in assisting. Not from an egotistical way or not from arrogance, but from a humble place of, we can bring in a trauma consultant, a trauma counselor, and others that can help with the as I said, the newer technologies and the newer knowledge, and fuse that with the best of the ancient wisdom. And many of the tribes are very open to that, and they want to connect with people like ourselves. And that's where I find the sweet spot will be in finding the answer to your question, Mishka, that it's going to be determined between us collaborating with the Indigenous tribes, and we'll do it in culturally appropriate ways that suits each tribe. Every single tribe is very different in different places that you go, and have very different situations, different dynamics. In Australia, for example, you can't look in Indigenous people's eyes. That's like a disrespectful thing. You don't look in people's eyes. So that's very unique, and it's a very shy culture. Before we went to the live, Michael, you mentioned as well, when there was a discussion about how many of the tribes were very peaceful, and they were very friendly to foreigners coming. And I think that happened on a universal scale all around the world. The Indigenous tribes in many areas were not hostile to us coming in, even though we were, in a sense, planning invasions, even in the early stages, the first pioneers or explorers. And some of these tribes showed incredible kindness, friendship, and they were really and they did live in these beautiful paradise situations where they had no want for anything. There was, I can't say it was paradise in all aspects. Maybe they had organized marriages and someone had to marry someone they didn't want to marry, or who knows what. I'm sure it wasn't perfect. But by all accounts, they had a wealth of abundance. And that says a lot about people, how they are internally, as how they treat foreigners or strangers. They didn't treat us in many places, and there are many examples that are definitely on the record that are proven that they were treated so well. Sometimes they were dying, they were adventurers, pioneers, and they were dying, and they were treated with a lot of hospitality. They were healed, they were helped in restoring their health when they were on death's bed because of running out of food or what have you. And they took them in and looked after us as aliens, really. I think, if we're going to say what is the Indigenous way, it's back to what I was saying. It's going to be reconnecting to having empathy for one another, looking after each other, and looking out for each other's best interests, through collaboration, because I'm a voluntarist, and I believe in individualism, from the extent of being free to be yourself and be what you want to be, do what you want to do with your life, reach your full potential, however you see your full potential. But I also see the place that's especially critical right now with what's happening on the planet right now, that we unite more and we learn from the indigenous cultures about unity within our families, and then unity within the community structure around you. And that would be, to me, the way. It's unity, unity in families and unity in community, and moving away from a far off government that's controlling everyone and telling everyone what to do, having some faceless entity with a president or a prime minister trying to control what people are doing in a local area. So the prime example would be here in Cherán in Mexico, which is 3 hours south of Guadalajara, where they kicked out the cartels and the politicians and the police 9 years ago, and they installed a blend of their ancient culture in terms of their form of government. And it is a locally elected government, but at the end of the day, the government has no power to violently oppress or oppose their community, which I think is amazing.
So what does the government, like the higher Mexican government, say about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Mishka, because it was like over a year in the courts, but there were a lot of Mexicans who supported this movement, and they said, good on you, because we're sick of the political system across Mexico, but none of us have the ability to rise up. None of us are prepared to rise up. Well, everyone's got the ability, but is there the will? No, in most of the world, there's no will, and we don't know what we don't know. I guess we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what next. Do we just protest like in Guatemala and then that's it?
Every September 15th?
or do we have a step-by-step process? Well, luckily they had the fallback. One, that they knew that the Constitution of Mexico had, because many, and I would say, I have to look into this, but I would imagine that the Zapata, Emiliano Zapata, the revolutionary from the early 1900s, he would have had a big influence on legal changes and on a lot of uprisings across Mexico. And his legacy, or at least the legacy from those times and from other indigenous people in Mexico, made it such that within their constitution they have clauses that protect indigenous sovereignty, similar to the Maori tribes in New Zealand.
What does it say, Mike?
It says, I don't know. Paul, can you say that? The USA?
Yeah. It's our traditions and customs.
Not political parties.
Yeah, not political parties. We are a government run by our traditions and our customs. Yeah, usos y costumbres. I mean, uses would be the direct translation, but it's uses, how they used the social culture, I guess, and that was the way they used their...
So like the Mexican Constitution says that you can follow the Mexican Constitution, but for those people that are tribal in nature, they can still have their customs. And that's essentially how Cherán has been able to declare their sovereignty from the rest of Mexico.
Yeah, it's a really interesting situation, and that's why I chose to live there on and off for 8 months. It was a really good experience to live in Cherán and connect with the indigenous community there, and learn firsthand how it's working and where they still have work to do. It's made to work in progress, and they are the first to admit that. That's where I was saying that it's Mishka. Like, I think the indigenous communities. I wouldn't even say that the government as such is the main authority in Cherán. It's the what they call the fogatas. So that, again, they have their very unique system, and it's quite wonderful. There's approximately, I believe, 150 fogatas across the town of 18,000 people. I may be incorrect. It may be 300. It may be 350. But let's just say, for argument's sake, 150 fireplaces across the neighborhoods, and there's fogata. There's like sectors within the each neighborhood. They have neighborhoods or sectors, and each one has a number of fogatas. So there's fogata 1, fogata 2, fogata 3 in this sector, and then another sector, fogata 1, fogata 2, fogata 3. And when people ask, how does the government system work in Cheran? I like to describe it this way. I say, well, the government is people sitting around a fire in their neighborhood. That's the government. They're like, well, isn't there like a parliament? Yeah, the parliament is 150 fireplaces in the street. And whenever there's an issue that needs to be discussed, it's go, okay, everyone to the fogatas. And then each person knows which fogata they're a part of, and they go and sit around the fireplace, and they burn wood, and they sit there each evening and discuss whatever the issue is. And then there's like an administrator, there's like a lead communicator from each fireplace who goes to the community, the sector head of, let's say it's 150 fireplaces. So then that's 150 community leaders who then go to the head of the community of the, what people want to achieve or what their thoughts are. And they discuss what was brought in from each of these fireplaces. Those 150 discuss it with the head of the all of the fogatas, and then that goes to the government. And that's not for the government to decide. That's like this is what the community decided.
So that sounds like sociocracy, right?
Very
large
similar.
degree.
Absolutely, yeah. Their own form of sociology. This is what's amazing. They're like anarchists or voluntarists without understanding the philosophy of voluntarism whatsoever.
But you don't have to have the same label to do the same thing, right? It's just a label.
Yeah.
Well,
How many people are those? Like, how many people govern themselves like that?
How many people do the governments what?
It's a whole
No,
province.
How many people overall would be able to govern themselves with that system?
Well, that is one village and territory. They've got about 24,000 hectares. So it's quite a large area, but the town itself is where most of the people live, and it's approximately 14,000 people in the town, and maybe another 4,000 in the territory that they have their own 110 or so security guards look after that whole territory and protect the territory. Yeah. And they analyze who's coming in and who's going out. So and that's 24/7. They have 3 roads going into the town, 3 major roads. And they basically check who's coming in and out of those 3 main entrances. And then they have other territorial boundaries. I've been invited, but I didn't make it out. But I've been invited to go just go check the boundaries to make sure no one's sneaking in through the fences or through the forest trails. So they go and check that no one's recently gone through with cars, and if someone's been going through regularly, stealing wood from the forest, because that was why the uprising started. There was a lot of insecurity, but they were destroying all the forest was being clear felled to put in avocado plantations, as well as just making a lot of money from selling the logs illegally, totally illegally. So that's where you've got to wonder, how corrupt is the Mexican government how do you illegally clear fell massive thousands of hectares of forest?
And plant avocados.
You can't, whether it's just to steal the wood or to plant avocados. In a lot of areas, they then move into plant avocados, but where they can't plant avocados because they don't own the land, they're just happy to make money from the logging. But it's kind of hard to run around a forest with a chainsaw and do that quietly.
But I'm also envisioning these people like going to someone else's land, clear cutting it, planting their own plants that have like a 2-year growth cycle. And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to get caught for the next 2 years because I can still harvest my avocados. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah. It's the whole thing was quite bizarre and very tragic. And they've got a memorial with photos of the faces of the people who died because there were protesters and university professors and local indigenous. The tribes are called the Purepecha, and they were protesting for. See, people talk about the levantamiento, the uprising, or levantamiento they call it in Cheran. And they have their own language too, which they would have another name for it in their language. I'm not sure what that word would be. But the levantamiento happened in 9 years ago. Approximately, I can't recall now exactly.
I just looked it up and I was wrong. Avocado plants have 15 years before they fruit.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a long-term thinking there on the part of the thieves.
That's right. And, in those areas, there's a lot of cartels, and they call it green gold. A lot of those. The cartels are murdering each other, not over prostitution and sex trafficking, not over cocaine, but over avocados, to own the territory and to control.
So hang on a second. So you mean
And
for the
vegans.
you mean for the last 20 years I've been careful about where I buy my weed because I didn't want anything from cartels, but yet it's my avocados that are grown by cartels? Is that what you're telling me right now? That I should stop buying avocados?
Boycott avocados.
Yeah,
Free the avocado.
Unless you know it's somehow fair traded, you don't want to be buying Mexican avocados. They call it green gold, and it's in large part, at least in Michoacan state, it's run by the cartels.
I don't think it usually says on the avocado if it's Mexican or otherwise.
Oh wow! In Australia, they have to say where it's from, which is interesting.
I guess
I've
maybe
never
it
even
does.
thought to look. I just buy an avocado, cut it up, and eat the shit out of it.
Yes, they're kind of addictive.
They're
Well,
immoral
they have-
avocados. Now you know.
They have a high fat content. So like I usually suggest, like, if you can handle meat, if you can handle animal protein, eat eggs, eat bacon, eat anything with fat in it, because that's what
Bacon,
your
if
body...
you can't handle animal protein, I don't know about
And
that.
avocados have a lot of fat in them too.
Yes.
And so that's one thing that I've actually been able to suggest to people who have different dietary needs is, like, if you can't handle animal protein, eat some avocados. So there goes my technique.
And if you can't handle animal protein, do not eat bacon. Do not eat
No.
bacon. You just said bacon, but you know what? She
said-
misspoke.
I said if you cannot handle if you can handle animal proteins, eat eggs, eat bacon, eat anything.
You just
that
said
has high
bacon
fat.
again.
Yes, Agnieszka.
Because
I'm
bacon
saying
is animal protein.
if you can
Oh,
handle
can handle.
animal fat and proteins, you should eat bacon and eggs.
Oh, I
That's
get
what
it.
I'm saying.
I get it. See, because I can't handle animal protein, and that's why I eat eggs. So for me, it's like, what?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
My experiment for most of the last 20 years, with a few times of going back to eating meat and cheese, but it's been like a lot of vegan experimentation, high plant-based, and avocado is one of my go-tos, plus linseeds and nuts and sesame seeds, sunflower seeds.
That's probably another show we need to do with you, Paul, because he's definitely got a...
I mean, they say, I'd love to come back as an avocado because everyone loves avocado. So when I'm reincarnated as an avocado.
So Paul, if the Indigenous Way is what I'm hearing is that would be a way where you have a loving relationship with your culture, with your roots, with your traditions, with your costumes. So it's if that is one of the things that would define the Indigenous Way, how would you experience the experiences that you had, that you shared with us a while ago? How would they have impacted the loving relationship you have with yourself? Like, I'm asking because I myself, I lived 15 years, far from the place I was born and I grew up into, and one of the things I recognized is that being in a totally different culture and part of the earth basically than the one I was grown up in, it made me reflect a lot about the habits, the culture that I experienced and I took for granted when I was living there. So there were like a few moments of shifts really where I was able to recognize some things that I would like to change and other things that I would actually learn to appreciate that I didn't appreciate before because I just took them as granted because I had them. So some things that I lost that became really important and nice, and I wanted to hold on to and even ensure that that's something I pass on to my children and so. And other things I was happy to adapt in the new environment and take in. So I was wondering if how your experiences and you're traveling, you're living together with indigenous cultures and communities, how that would have shaped the loving relationship we all have with our inner self, with ourselves.
Yeah, wonderful. That's amazing, Dennis. And I like how you frame that question with your experience and how you were on one level embracing the new and the exciting and the adventure of this new culture and learning new things, but you're also feeling some sentimentality for the things that you might have lost through the journey of such a huge shift. How old were you when you moved?
I left I traveled and lived in Brazil before, but I moved to Jamaica in 2004, so that was about, like in my early 20s, 20, 21.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you grew up in Brazil until 2020?
In Germany. I was born and grown in Germany, and I would travel several months at a time. Once I was 6 months living in Brazil, and then I came back for a short while, and then I left for Jamaica for 15 years.
Oh, let me get, just to be clear, just so I can understand your so how old were you? So you were born in Germany, and how old were you when you left Germany?
17 when I left for Brazil, and then there was a few months at a time. I went back to Germany, back to Brazil, so it was like a few months back and forward. But I lived in Jamaica for 15 years, and that was from about I think 20. Yeah, when I was about 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. So you spent quite a long time in Brazil. So you learned fluent Portuguese in 5 or 6 years before you moved to Jamaica, and learned some Jamaican.
Yeah.
Creole.
Yes,
what's the language?
Patois.
What's the language in Jamaica? Like, what do they call
Patois.
Sorry?
Patois. They call it Patois.
I've never heard that. That's interesting. Yeah, I know they've got. Of course, there's English as well, and probably a mixture of different languages. Yeah.
Well, Patois is like English. It's just a weird English.
Yeah,
well, it's a cut down English, but they establish, and it's actually interesting. You can study it at UWI, at University of West Indies now, and it's like it's its own language. So there have been people struggling to say that no, it's not just like a version of English, but it has its own language. One of the big arguments was that it doesn't have the complexity to convey complex how would you say circumstances or so. But then interesting, like people argue that look at the proverbs. So Patois is full of proverbs, small sayings that actually that have a really profound and deep meaning. So that was one of the arguments that say, hey, look here, like that is its own language, because we can transfer knowledge and deep meaning and understanding through even our proverbs.
Which is not you can transfer information that is not as easy to capture in English. Yeah. And there's roots of different African languages and dialects in it. There's they say there's pieces of Spanish and Portuguese which I don't really see so much, because like I speak both, but I'm sure there's influences and of course it's English as well. It's a cut down English. There's even different versions of it as well. Some of them are actually extinct or almost extinct. But yeah, like Patois is something that's spoken like in the street. Their business language is English. But then like on the street, and especially the more, the poorer people, if you go downtown Kingston or so, like, or in the rural villages even more so, then people would speak straight Patois. Wow. So fascinating. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, you're good. That happens all the time on this show. So, when Dennis, you were talking about like proverbs and how they're like sayings, it made me think of a quote that I heard on another podcast that Kurt was listening to that I cannot recall at the time. And he said, the currency of stories is never truth, it's meaning. And that really like struck a chord with me, because I was like, man, you could convey so much meaning through a story about pink elephants riding candy canes in the sky.
Oh, wow.
As long as it doesn't have to be true. It just has to convey a meaning. And so it doesn't surprise me that a lot of that language is filled with tiny little stories.
Yeah.
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head too. That's what a lot of Indigenous cultures are rich with, that situation.
Hey, you guys, I just want to stop us for just a second and say hello to our listeners, and Shambhavi and Tony McCurdy. Hi.
Like, where are our listeners?
Whoever is listening to us on YouTube. Well, the comments haven't been coming from YouTube. The comments have come from Facebook, but there were people on YouTube, and there are still people on YouTube. So, hi, YouTube people.
Anyone have any questions? Yeah, if anyone like for us, or based on the conversation. Yeah, Dan. So I haven't actually like specifically answered your question, which would and that's so interesting, your background and your story, and I think it touches on something really valuable that I feel like we're in a very blessed time, even now with what's happened with COVID and 1984. yeah, that it's bringing us an opportunity. It's like so many doors have opened where humanity has been enslaved for over 4,000 years, arguably much longer, and we have this opening in opportunities and in our consciousness, and so many more people are questioning everything, and many of us, started questioning earlier, and some have come later. And we're looking for answers and going back to these roots and these ancient meanings that are some in the proverbs as well. There's so many things we can learn there, and there's also a lot of ancient wisdom that is being lost, like you mentioned, Dennis. That like some of these languages are being lost, and then some of those proverbs and some of those cultural roots and those meanings are being lost. So from my travels, and particularly from being in Chermak, because that's where I spent the most time in one community, the Purepecha communities. There are some elders who have like this incredible ancient wisdom, and some of them are very happy and just sharing where they can, and they've got a nice happy countenance to them. But many of them would love to share their wisdom further. But many of the younger generation is not so interested necessarily. Others just need some more assistance to maybe help facilitate the sharing of the information in a more effective way. Because there's like I was really impressed to find quite a few young people kind of sort of feeling a little bit ashamed. You can sort of see it in their energy and in their body language and in the way they spoke. Like, oh, I can't speak Purepecha, but I want to learn. I've just started learning again. They're really proud of their roots, and they want to relearn their languages again. And often they just want to speak English. They just want to learn the language of the United States, and they're wearing American clothes. But it was so beautiful to see that there's more and more people who want to understand their cultural roots. Where I'm very grateful that I can speak my family language, Slovak, because it gives us more richness in our lives, and that you covered that energy with your experience too, Dennis. So yeah, I feel like we're in a time not only of great opportunity across the planet for an awakening and a new consciousness of freedom and liberty and living more in harmony with each other and with our natural world, which we haven't even covered, the indigenous connection and love for Earth and love for our Earth Mother, but we may have time for that. But we have this opportunity to preserve some of this wisdom that's really useful to us today. It's especially about finding what's of value and use. So much of this wisdom, if we lose it, it's lost forever. So I'm really excited with the work I'm doing and the people I'm connecting with, and with people like yourselves being interested in these areas of tapping in and connecting and building networks with these people with this tribal wisdom, and then supporting them to make sure it's documented and passed on and shared, especially around Charan, the medicine women, or they call them curanderas. They're so fun, they're so beautiful. There's some younger ones, but there's a lot of older ones, men and women, but the women are called curanderas, and they have a lot of wisdom of the local herbs and medicinal plants. And it's just so beautiful to hear them discussing that, and now everyone's using Western medicine. Everyone's gone, and everyone's getting so sick in Charan too. Most people are so sick, and they're seeing we need to go back. So they know there's an urgency to move back to their tribal ways, but they're a little confused or haven't figured out yet how to implement that on a mass scale. But they're really hungry to do so.
But I think that the battle these days is inside our own heads, right? We have to win that battle in our heart and in our head to understand how the world works and all that. And by the way, hi Abigail.
Yes, hi Abigail. Great to have you on here.
But
sorry.
Good.
Paul, I love when you said that there is an openness of those communities of receiving. I've experienced and seen the other side as well, where there was much disappointment and much, like trying to block off and keep others or foreigners like away that are not part of the community because of, traumatic past experiences.
Oh, yeah.
So I love to hear when you said that there is openness and that foreigners and people from outside of the communities are often welcomed openly. And I feel that maybe that is really the potential that there is, because if there's traditional communities and people that are open to share and to revive or to maintain their culture and tradition, yet that I would assume, but I have experienced like in Jamaica and Brazil as well, oftentimes those communities are, amongst the poorest of the poor. So in terms of, traveling, buying an airplane ticket and moving around, that is not a potential that they would readily have. Yet, what in our first world, so-called developed nations, that potential is there. So people can travel, they can buy, they can go on holidays and fly across, the earth. At least they could before the current situation. But anyway, it's much more easier
Well,
to
you
do
still
that.
can,
So,
the Mexican border is only closed to foot traffic, not to airplane traffic.
yeah, so what I see is then that on one side, if there's openness of those who have knowledge and wisdom to share, and then there's people who are open to learn and who have the potential, to access that, then that is something that really could, that an exchange could be facilitated in a fruitful way. Because if then instead of traveling around just for the sake of being in an all-inclusive hotel for 2 weeks and not really seeing or engaging with the people that live in that place that you actually visited, you haven't really seen anything of much value in my point of view. But then to facilitate a meaningful exchange, I think that is something I've witnessed a few times around the world, in Jamaica as well, especially with the Maroons community there, which were former runaway slaves basically that fought the English, and in Brazil they were called the Quilombolas. So there's some of them who really the Charleston Maroons, for example, whom I big up if they're listening, but they have managed to tap into the tourist market. So instead of just offering like some plastic item made in China, they actually they're carrying tourists by the busload now into their terrain, into the Asafu yard, into the warrior yard. They carry them around. They build a little museum. They they engage them in their dance activities. They show them nature. They show them how they used to treat each other, how they live together in communities, and show them about their culture and history. So I feel there's like points where we can connect, where people can come together, where we can make use of the fact that some of the Western people would have ease or would have the possibility to travel or to to give economically, while others have the knowledge and the wisdom to give from that end of the road.
Yeah, Dennis. Yep.
I was just gonna say, I'm always amazed at this, the desire of human beings, no matter where you came from, what your culture is. When you don't have a community, you are always looking for a community. You're looking for a place to fit in. You mentioned at the beginning of the show, like the Industrial Revolution. Did you know that that's how we got the Second Enlightenment into church?
No.
Because all these people were working on farms. They were with their family and being apprentices for their family. And then all of a sudden they moved to big cities where they had to live in basically dorm rooms that, you had a bathroom, but you had a common area that you ate, lunch or dinner in. And then, sorry, I was just reading a comment, got distracted, squirreled. But then they realized that there was no community. Like, you didn't really get an interaction with the people you were living with, so they all started going to church. And that's how the Second Enlightenment started, was all of these people who were disconnected from their families, disconnected from their community, and were living basically alone, needed something. So they went to church, and the ritualistic nature of it, the community of, I think like you, you think like me, this is a safe place. It's a huge draw. And I see this pattern play itself out in so many different cultures and so many different aspects, where all these people, they're all searching for a community, and as long as there's a community there, people will come.
Yeah, Willow and Dennis, both of you covered some amazing ground there. If I can comment on both of those, but initially just Willow with what you mentioned. It's incredible how throughout history we're so adaptable and resilient as humans, and we find a way. We need that sense of community and connection to thrive. For most people, some people go off and live in a cave and meditate for 5 years, but most of us, don't thrive in that, and we're not motivated to do something like that. And we want that connection and respect and support and that collective ability to achieve things and enjoy something that we've created, or go on a walk and then show, with a partner or with a friend. And it's so much more enjoyable to see a beautiful vista or stand on the top of a mountain with someone rather than alone. It's just in our human way. And there's a book called Mutual Aid or Welfare State. That's about the very much British or English style of what they call friendly societies. So people before governments came and started doing the welfare state situation, where people didn't look after each other, they didn't collaborate together. It was all left to a third party, which was this monolithic state. So there was less connection between people. through the state taking more and more power, and you know, the state will look after you. Where before you had it's a beautiful name too, they called them friendly societies, and it was basically like people-powered welfare. So it was mutual aid. People just you know, could put money into a fund. It was very much like the early version of insurance. You know, and in any case, around that formed, you know, collectives and groups and social gatherings and social events. So it was you know, I would say an alternative to the religious side of it. But you know, you could be part of a yoga community, you can be part of any kind of community, and some are probably more beneficial than others. And then back to the point of what Dennis is saying, this is exactly what my work is. Who want to learn from these cultures and who want to connect and collaborate and create meaningful connections and like have conscious tourism between Indigenous tribes. And I would love to see this happen all around the world, but like Dennis was saying about people coming into the community, but doing it in a respectful way. So I like to talk to families in Chiran and other places, and people can come and instead of staying at a resort or just in a hotel, you know, go and share a meal in a traditional family home and eat a traditional Purupecha / Mexican meal, and meet the family and meet the grandparents, and then something can be given back to that community, you know, economically as well to support them. But these people, you know, they wouldn't organize these sort of things because they're not motivated by money and by business, but they do love sharing a meal. So why not then, if we do it in a culturally appropriate way, we can then give them some funds or help their children with the youth program that we bring in. So my work is really around bringing in conscious tourism, supporting youth programs, and there's a lot of need for that in all communities, but especially in Indigenous communities, problems with their youth, feeling lost, confused, and disconnected, not knowing what community they're a part of, and then they end up in drugs or in the cartels. And then also building cooperatives. So to me, the cooperatives are kind of, because I love friendly societies and that concept. It came to Australia with the first fleet. Within weeks, the first fleet came to Australia. They called the ships that came with the convicts to Australia in approximately, I'm not sure what year exactly, but it was around 1790. My history is terrible. But maybe it was 1788. No, that's when they first arrived. But yeah, they brought the first fleet in a couple of years later. So 1790 or so. And within weeks, they had formed a friendly society where people were all chipping in some funds. And then if someone's house burnt down or someone became a widow, they were looked after. But they also had lots of social gatherings and social events. So back to that point as well, Dennis, about the trust issue. Of course, so many of them are in trauma and find it hard. And what I noticed from Indigenous communities is they really struggle with people coming, just wanting to learn about their culture, and because they get so many people come in, even if they're like an anthropologist or someone studying for some part of their university degree or thesis, or a reporter or someone who wants to make a documentary. They come into these communities, do their filming, and they're just extracting. They're never putting back in, you know. Some of them don't even pay any money. Some of them, like some mentioned to me, oh, this person had some success with this documentary. And then we asked if they could, like, you know, we were the ones who made the documentary. Without us, there wouldn't have been a documentary. The documentary was about us and our culture, and it was our time that went into the interviews. You know, could you make a donation or contribution of some sort to our community for the success and the prestige that you've gained through making a documentary about us? And then they never hear back. You know, and they're just like, wow, that was a bit of a slap in the face. You know, so and that's like that's at the lower end of the scale of exploitation, or of not really wanting to actually make a real contribution to these communities, just going in there like they're just on a petri dish, you know, coming in and so we've got to go into these communities like they're part of our family, part of our tribe. That's the way that I feel these communities, they want us to be part of their tribe. They don't want us to be like we're coming in to study them on a petri dish.
You know, that's the best way to travel. The going into people's, like I did first time I ever did that was I was 13. I was traveling with my parents. We went to Budapest, and my parents had to go to some kind of a event, like a ball or something official, and they left me with this. I'm an Esperanto speaker, so that means I'm in the Esperanto community. And so I was left with somebody who's Hungarian in the Esperanto community for the whole day, and she took me with her kids to like a Luna Park or fair of some sort, and then we talked about the society. I was 13, right? So I was like, I was curious about politics and realities of life in Hungary and all that. And one of the things I learned that day was that, because I was coming from Poland, and at the time this was like in the 80s, right? I think 87. And
you speak Esperanto when you were 13?
I spoke Esperanto when I was like 10.
That's amazing.
Well, my parents spoke Esperanto, so it's not like, it wasn't like, a thing. It was just like something I didn't even know. It was weird. And so so I was talking to this woman, and I said, wow, in Poland, because we're like, this is before the wall went down, right? So in Poland, we only had plain packages, plain rice, like it was like brown paper bag, and it had a stamp rice on it, and the other one had flour on it, right? And they were all identical packages with just different stamps. And in Hungary, they had all these beautiful packaging with all these pictures and everything. And I was just like, as a kid, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a rich country. Look at all the stuff they got. It's like in Germany or something, right? This is not an Eastern European country. But then the lady said, of course, yeah, you saw this tower of wine. There was a tower of wine, and there was all these shiny packages, and they were all these square boxes of wine, like 2-liter boxes of wine. It was a tower taller than me. It was amazing. We got one. But that's not the point. The point is, the lady said that they couldn't afford any of that stuff. That all they could afford is the plain packages that were on the bottom shelf of the supermarket. And that all that other stuff was just for show. And most of those colored products were expired or old or whatever, because nobody bought them, because most people in Hungary could not buy them. And so it was just like, let's very Eastern Europeans, postav się. Let's show what we got without actually, having any. So
it's almost worse to have it in your face like that, just dangling it in your face, this.
But it is very Eastern European, because we want to show off in front of others, right? And Budapest being the city with a lot of visitors and stuff, they wanted to show that the downtown grocery store was really good. And it was impressive. But, but these kind of things you would never learn, and then traveling, like as a 19-year-old, traveling to Holland and finding out that, yeah, sure, we're a rich country, we're a Western country, but nobody can have a place to live. The place that they were living in was a bachelor, and it had a bookshelf halfway through it to separate the bedroom from the living room. And I've seen that a number of times in Holland as well. So it's a normal way of being in Holland. Well, it's a first world country. How is that possible? How can you not have a separate bedroom for you? You're a couple. You're like 50 years old or 60 years old. Like, what's up with that? Holland doesn't have much land. Every year the sea takes away some land from us. So we just live how we can live, Bigger apartments are much more expensive.
That's still before the wall came down, you were in Holland?
No, right after, maybe. A couple of years after.
Yeah, interesting.
But they still don't have much land in Holland. The land mass hasn't changed, right? The people probably have grown, but the land mass hasn't changed. I'm sure that Dutch people have even smaller apartments now. If that's possible.
to add on to what, back to your original point of like, you don't know this stuff until you actually go into someone's home. I had a similar experience. I didn't learn anything. It wasn't like, this is a new custom. Well, actually, I kind of did. I was in Korea. I was in South Korea for a year, and our rent was absurd. It was like 14 million won, which was $1,400, $1,500 roughly. And I was like, holy crap, I've never lived in an apartment that you have to pay. It's an apartment, and I'm paying $1,500 to live in this apartment. It's big and gorgeous, and I could see why it's $1,500. But then I asked my Korean friend, she had mentioned, she said, look over there across the hall. That apartment is the exact same thing as yours, but you know what the difference is? That's a Korean family living there, and they pay about $500.
Ah, yeah.
And I was like, what? Why? And I started getting upset, but then she explained to me that because we were through the military, if you're an American and you try to buy an apartment in Korea, they assume you're with the military. So they will charge you the max for what the military will pay for housing, which was about $1,500 for an apartment. So she would go around and help all of the American people who actually were living there outside of the military, and she'd go haggle with the realtor companies and explain to them they are not with the military. Like, you had to have someone on your side to translate and haggle for you, because there were so many customs that were different. Like, they treated you different because they assumed that you are with the military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's so fascinating that you grew up in an Esperanto family as well. That's really interesting, Mishka.
Never mind about what Willow said about Korea. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, sorry.
Hey, the Esperanto, learning a different language at age 10 is definitely way cooler.
I don't know if I was totally fluent until about 13. I mean, I did speak Esperanto. My mom and I would go to Esperanto meetings and stuff in Gdańsk, because that's where I was living. And so, and we also went to a lot of Esperanto vacations, because I don't know, it was 2 weeks in the mountains with a bunch of Esperanto families, and, you know, just like hiking in the mountains and learning Esperanto. I don't know. That's what I did as a kid.
Back to the theme of love, I mean, it was designed as a language to bring people together, to connect hearts, connect cultures, and to allow a universal language for everybody. And what a beautiful vision that they had in creating Esperanto, to allow, because basically to me, you become another person through another language. You become another culture is infused in you. And then Esperanto was founded on that principle of bringing cultures together under one common ability to communicate. So obviously to be able to communicate their culture, communicate that we're all one, ultimately we're all one family across the planet. And it's better to be a loving family than an extraction and exploiting family.
You know, there are quite a few Esperantists in Mexico.
I think it might be, there might be a resurgence in Esperanto now, which is really positive. I've only know it in a very cursory way. But yeah, and I mean, you know, that's pretty normal too. Going to the point Willow mentioned, it's pretty common. I mean, going to Cuba as well. Now it may have changed, but I was there in 2000, and by law, you weren't allowed to use Cuban pesos. It was illegal for a foreigner. And I was trying to find ways, and I finally was able to buy a stack of Cuban cigars for like, 10 cents each instead of the Cohiba cigars, which were like minimum $5 each. So it was a big difference, 10 cents per cigar to $5 US per cigar for a Cohiba, which you were only legally allowed to buy the $5 cigars. So, you know, I mean, again, it's each culture is doing the best they can, but of course we feel a bit exploited then. You know, when we're paying a different price, it's like different pricing, where we want to be connecting more as one family that treats each other as equals. Yeah, that's a whole conversation in itself, and there can be different reasons and justifications for charging different.
I wonder though. I'm not exactly happy with the practice of it, because yeah, I do, you know, feel exploited, but yeah. I do wonder how much that pushes, like, if we don't, for example, when I was in Korea, I found out that people would treat you very, very different if you spoke English. So I made an effort to learn the first thing I learned was I'm sorry. And as soon as I said, you know, something, I could butcher it. But as long as I was trying to speak Korean or Hangul, I can't remember, I'll have to ask my friend. As soon as I started doing that, their whole attitude changed. It was like, all of a sudden, I literally had a man hold out his hand like this and stare directly. He was just like, pay me for the taxi, basically. And wouldn't look at me. And I was like, thank you. And I said it in Korean, and I butchered it so bad because he corrected me. And all of a sudden he turned around, he was like, oh, thank you. You were such a wonderful customer. In his broken English. And I was like, are you bipolar? Did something change here? And I realized it's because I tried.
You pressed the button.
I tried to speak their language, and as soon as I tried, it was like a whole different demeanor. So I wonder if that's a way to try and encourage people who want to try to fit in a little bit and accept their culture, whether that's like a barrier for people who really aren't just interested and they're just gonna, not be grateful for the experience they had.
It is definitely, like, from my experience as well, because I've been teaching safety and security briefings and workshops for Jamaican returnees, like people who would live abroad for sometimes decades and want to come back, to their home country, and which is
They needed
sometimes,
governmental retraining for re-entry to the country. That's interesting.
No, it wasn't governmental. It was from actually from a non-governmental organization who also was one of the largest organizations that would deal with volunteers from all over the world, basically, who would come to Jamaica. So they would have like a week or 2 weeks like of training, basically to get into the local mode and to be an orientation, basically, to prepare people for what to do. And so I was doing the safety and security side of those things, and just speaking from my experience, basically having lived there and walked in all the areas that every guide and every tourist book tells you not to ever go in, and so one of the key things that I taught, and which was my experience really, is the language, just like you said, Willow, because if even if visibly you were a foreigner, and that would have been hard to change, and in order not to
that's why you grew that hair, right?
The white man treatment, or the tourist who just drop off of the ship, or who just step out of the airplane treatment, then that was like a key thing that would that would save me, or that would change around situations, like even sometimes difficult situation, like right away, just to, and you didn't have to be perfect, but just to show that actually you're not here to exploit, or to to be the rich guy, to be the foreigner or whatever, and to look down at people, but you're here to to meet people at eye level, and you're actually here because, and you're open and interested in their culture and what's going on, and like you're trying to talk like them, you're trying to walk, you're trying to to not only to take away, but just like you said, Paul, as well, you're trying to give something, you're bringing something to the table, you're trying to to be open yourself and to take in what they have to offer. So language and humor were two of the key things that I found that enabled me, and then subsequently others as well, to actually to connect and to maybe not to blend in, but to
assimilate.
To assimilate in communities, and in parts where where even local people would not even dare to drive through with their vehicles. So it's like, so that's really amazing. Like if you then can also see that sometimes somebody who might look harsh, or who might shout or scream at you like on the street, and it's often like there, it's just to test you. It's to figure out, like, are you going to be afraid? Are you going to be upset? Are you going to be pissed? Or do we have a joke, or do we have some local patois or some slang that you can respond with? And put some humor to it, and then like people will relax because they know, somebody who just dropped off at the ship is basically, he's not going to know that, but he, like, this guy, he knows that I'm just checking out, that I'm just shouting at him to see what's going on, and he has the right response. Okay, so it's like, it's easy, and what's going on. So humor and language were some of the key things that I feel can cut right through a lot of things and connect us to who we really are then, and kind of and that really brings me to the common unity. Because if it's, and that would have been my question as well, Paul, like, do you feel that the indigenous communities, the curadoras, the healers, the elders, the wise ones especially, that carry the load of the tradition, that carry the weight of the of the culture of their community, that they would have experienced, that they have that sense of common unity from which they would operate, and from which their willingness and their openness that you described earlier would come, to basically see that there's something beyond the flesh and the blood and the skin color and the way we talk and the way we look and the food that we eat and the music that we listen to, that there's something beyond that, which is really what I was trying to get on earlier as well, that loving relationship with ourselves, with our true self. Yeah. Because once we carry this, once we are in union with our true self, then there's no difficulty we have in connecting with anybody else, really.
Yeah, Dennis, now I started to get goosebumps, and then you started to get a little teary-eyed as you were saying that, because ultimately that is what it comes down to. There are some people in Indigenous communities are still very wary and cautious, and some are even too trusting, or you could say naive. They're still trusting of people when they come, and where the person may just be coming from a very superficial standpoint, which is not too harmful, but some come with an intention just to extract whatever it may be, whether it was the loggers coming to extract, someone else wants to do some tours and just wants to use them as almost like a zoo to bring tourists to just come and have a quick look and then drive through. And then often tourism can be very destructive. It can bring a lot of negative elements, as many of us would know, and it creates an economy, sure, but if they're losing their cultural roots at the same time, in many indigenous communities, especially in Mexico, where they're becoming more independent, it's creating more wealth because the cartels and the government are not extracting so much money, and in these areas are more successful in business. There's less blackmail and kidnappings and what have you, and people just have less fear, so that the economy can thrive because businesses thrive more. But then they've lost a lot of their identity, and then they've got extra wealth and money. What do? They buy more alcohol, and they buy more sweets and junk food, and they destroy their health even more, you know, and then women have to deal with more drunk men around, because many of these indigenous communities, Australia, there's a similar situation. So it is beautiful to see a lot of these people of the older generation and elders in these communities, and some of the younger ones and the middle age, all the way across the spectrum. There are people who are really hungry to come back to pride within their culture, and to bring back that sense of pride in who they are, loving themselves. And then that's something that all of us need to learn. And if we all of us need to love ourselves before we can love others. We need to have unconditional forgiveness with ourselves before we can forgive others. And there's no other example. There are some extreme examples of horrific situations people have been through with rape and gang rape and what have you, and then or someone murdered a family member and they forgive the perpetrator. But so many of these indigenous cultures, they have so much forgiveness, and they don't take it against us when we come in. So let's not take it. And they're interested and curious, and they would love to share their wisdom. So let's show that we are coming in. And this is really where my passion lies in the work that I'm doing. And as you were speaking, Dennis, I was just visualizing all the faces of all these curanderas and the healers and the elders that I've connected with, just seeing their faces and their smiles and their joy and celebration when people come and show that I'm not here coming as a tourist. I'm here. I might be leaving because I've got to go and work on some things that I'm doing at the moment. But I've come here to connect with you and build a bridge that will only get stronger over time. I keep reconnecting. I keep calling and checking in, and I'm on my way back now to Chermak after 6 months away or so, and I'm on my way back now to take things to the next level. So with what we're working on and what we've been planning from a distance. So I agree with you that really it comes back to learning from how many of us have been through hardships. Many of these indigenous cultures have been destroyed on so many levels, but the wisdom is still there. And this may be like, the final generation to some degree where we can tap into this wisdom, because things are changing so fast, and they will continue to evolve. A language may die or some cultural roots may disappear, and there's a natural process in that. But there's also so much wisdom that we shouldn't just be arrogant and say, no, our new modern way of culture and our new Facebook lifestyle is the way. We don't need these old cultures and these old traditions. No, we should be willing to help these indigenous people preserve what's of value to them, but also look into these cultures and see what we can learn. And again, back to the principle of looking after one another as a family, lots of touch and intimacy with children, just staying really close and a lot of affection with children. That is like a hallmark of many indigenous cultures, that they looked after each other in that way, where they were very close. And look, many of these cultures have lost those traditions too. But I know that when I speak to some of these elders, I get a lot of hope that we can rescue a lot of the beautiful parts of their traditions that bring them this great joy, that let them be so kind and friendly and warm. And many of our cultures have become cold and distant, and we're all distrusting of each other. And so I think we can definitely come back to that understanding of how we can live in that way, of more trust, being able to trust each other, of more intimate connection, feeling like we're a brotherhood, a global brotherhood, and respecting the local indigenous customs at the same time. So, and that's what I really see a lot of other people working on that. I'm not the only one that's interested in this area. So that's.
Are there connections between those indigenous communities? Because there's certainly a large variety of them. And do you see local or even international connections? The example of the Maroons in Jamaica. So there's a yearly ceremony where where then all the local tribes would come together, the local different Maroons would come together and gather, but they also would have invited even Aborigines from Australia, representatives of Guyana, of other Maroons, basically, or Quilombolas from all over the world. And that was also very, heartwarming to me to see that it's not, they don't only stay among themselves, but there's also like a connection and the opening to international people who can share in their spirit and who can see what they're trying to achieve with their work today.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because just randomly, very just before I was leaving Cheran, something happened and I missed some appointment, or some plans got changed, and I was a little bit upset about it, or not a little bit upset. I was a little bit like deflated, a little bit down, and then then one of my close friends, one of the community elders in Cheran, mentioned off the cup. I just happened to bump into them, and they said, "Oh, there's this event on." I said, "Are you going?" It was they called the cultural La Casa de Cultura, the cultural house of Cheran, and it's a massive building. And they love music, and they have bands dancing through the street. Well, playing music through the streets. There's a lot of parties happening in Cheran. I didn't go into the details, but they love festivals and parties and celebration. And unfortunately, often alcohol ends up involved, and that's not a positive side of that. But the communities come together, and anyone can walk down the street and come and join these parties. And there's always plenty of food, and it's part of their tradition to share the food with you. So it's beautiful traditional food, but then it's with a Coca-Cola and soft drinks, which doesn't excite me very much. I went along to this event, and my friends couldn't make it. But this event was run by a group called Antiversity or Ecoversity. There's a few different names. I can't recall the exact name of it, but I've got the details of a lot of the people involved in my notes somewhere put aside. But it was a group that had come together from all around the world. There was so just by random, I ended up in this hall, and it took 2 hours before it started. But I was just so grateful to be there on that day that I could have so easily not have been there. And there were Maori elders, there were like people representing the Maori tribes coming to this little village of Cheran. There were people from different tribes in Africa. There were North American, Native American people. There was no Australian Indigenous people. There were people from the Amazon. And then there were just people from all walks of life who were passionate about a new kind of university. And they were all coming together and having talks and discussing a little bit about the Cheran situation. But overall, it was fairly superficial. It felt fairly superficial. It wasn't going to that deeper level, but it was an opening. It was a start, and it's people who are wanting to build more bridges. So then there's the opportunity for those of us who say live in Mexico, who can help. So I do plan to connect further with that organization that arranged that event, and they are working in Mexico, and I'd just like to see where they're going forward with collaborating with Cheran community. I don't think there's a lot of connection happening right now, just from my intuition tells me that, but I would like to be one of the facilitators helping to bring more of this global connection to keep moving forward. So they already set up something incredible to bring people from all walks of life to Cheran, and I got to be a part of that. And what was amazing, one of my friends in Cheran, who she's a young woman, she's very much like involved in Indigenous issues, but she's very shy and quiet. And unfortunately, my phone was stolen. That's another story. My good phone was stolen. My other phone just didn't have any memory on it. And I wanted to record it, but I didn't get a chance. But this friend, who was an Indigenous Purepecha woman, who's probably about, I would say she'd be 19, 20. And the talk was fairly superficial. Even the speeches, they were lovely, but it just, I didn't feel like anything was deep and coming from the heart. People just had rehearsed their lines or had some thoughts they wanted to share. I'm very much about deep, genuine, heartfelt passion within the person. And with all due respect to everyone was kind of just doing their talk. And there were some beautiful people, amazing speakers. It was phenomenal. But, they were all like fairly new to each other. So it was just a fairly new environment for everyone. But this Purepecha woman, who's very shy, who I just knew her because I had a stall selling health food. And part of my way of connecting in communities, I come and share very cheap or low cost, even free smoothies and give them to kids. And I bring toys and play with the children. And I have like a market stall. And I do that when I enter communities. It's a great way for them to, everyone's, who's this foreigner selling like just in the street, like all of us? He's just a humble person who just sells in the street with a little table and got my wares there, a few books. And In any case, this woman, she also was selling mushrooms and other foods and things with her mother. And she stood up and she looked so scared, but then she started speaking. And this was right at the end. And she so politely, she said some very controversial things about the problems in their culture, how women are mistreated by a lot of men in their indigenous culture. But she said it with so much heart and apologizing, like, I'm very sorry, I don't want to offend anyone, but I do want to speak my truth as a woman in the Purepecha culture. And it just brought me to tears, and everyone was, to me, that was the best speech from the whole day. And it wasn't even an organized speech. It was just, she just felt this urge to get up and say something deep and meaningful. So I just wanted to just finish on that, there are young people who would love to speak up about what's really deep in their heart. And sometimes the older people just talk more, thinking of what everyone else is thinking about them. But some people want to talk from deep in their heart, and they're not getting the opportunity sometimes. So I especially have stayed close with this lovely woman, and I've said, now I know your heart because of how you spoke that day. And we're very close friends now. And I want to help her share her message, because I know that right now she's probably not getting a chance to share her message. Every time we've spoken, I noticed some frustration. She's mentioned that frustration, that she still doesn't have a voice. And I said, don't worry, I'm working with some beautiful people across Mexico and around the world. And we're gonna work something out together, and we're gonna do everything possible to let you have the voice that you deserve to have as a young woman who wants a better future for your culture, your community, and for your world. So yeah, all of us are in on this together,
Definitely.
Yeah, that was
You're
so.
muted.
Just now.
Oh,
I didn't even have a chance. Paul, if people want to get a hold of you or know more about what you're doing, where would they find your information?
Well, we've got a website that would you believe, my web developer only speaks Spanish, and he's in Guatemala, but he's been ill and he's been struggling with that, and now he's kind of unable to finish off our website, but it's still live, and people can contact us through the website. But that is at ecovillageshare.com. So just ecovillageshare.com, pretty simple. And also, through my name, Paul Chermak. And if you put in organic, my main profile will come up on Facebook. Or you can email me too, which is, if I can mention that on the line.
You don't mind?
Go for it.
Yeah, just Paul, then SUV, that stands for Suva and not SUV, the car. Suva, and my Maori friends in Australia, Maoris from New Zealand, but they first introduced me to the term Suva, and very much similar to sovereign. But so it's Paul, Paul SUV, at Zoho, ZOHO.com. So that's if you want to email me directly. Awesome. Yeah, our website is a movement to help people find health solutions, to join our cooperatives that we're working on setting up right now. We're looking at getting our first legal entity set up as a cooperative, and that's at ecovillageshare.com.
And
Abigail. Actually, I haven't seen anybody on YouTube, so.
Okay. Well, I'll catch it on the replay, but definitely thank you to everybody for taking the time and listen, and giving us your time and attention. Also, I just want to mention Paul. We're trying to get him hooked up with Autonomy here, so Paul might be another one of our season 4 people. Hopefully, maybe in the next week or two. I don't know, depending on, or season 5 if you
just
can't make
beware. If you join, you have to deal with us all the time.
All right, okay.
But that might be an opportunity as well, Paul, to kind of clear up some of those necessities that you've got going on with your stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But
finishing off our website would be nice. It's just been delayed and stalled. So yeah, anyone with WordPress experience, definitely.
I'm sure we can find some of those.
Yeah.
As far as our next show, Wednesday, we're going to be covering what are we going to be covering, Agnieszka? Oh, Dennis?
Communities.
Wednesday, the theme is going to be community, right? So we're going to talk about communities. What kind of communities are we part of? What are the ones that are obvious and that we know about? What are the ones that we might be part of without even being too aware of it? What kind of communities, what kind of types of communities are there? Which ones are working, which ones aren't? So, you know, today was a perfect segue into that, I believe. There's a lot of valuable information that we got. So yeah, join us on Wednesday again and find out more about communities, and chime in as well, and you know, give us your input and your questions, and it surely will be exciting. And thank you so much, Paul. That was really amazing. Thank you for joining us. I'm stoked to hear that there might be a chance of you know, interacting more with you even through Autonomy. And even if not, I'd like to, you know, stay in touch and you know, follow up on your work, and who knows, maybe.
No, that sounds great. Yeah.
That would be it. 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh my
Did
gosh,
you
I was
know-
muted this whole time. Anyway,
That's-
I'm going to play the
I heard
outro now. All right. Have fun, everybody.